So user experience designer, user experience architect, which is the title I had before. User experience or UX is a field that is in the tech industry. So it is something that you don't have to have a technical background necessarily. You don't have to code ever. Some companies like a little bit of knowledge of CSS and HTML, but really don't have to ever code. All you do really is apply some cognitive psychology and research elements with combined with visual elements such as design. Um, you can do graphic design a little bit, visual design, and then it's all about representing the end user. So a lot of folks want to develop a product, want something out there in the market. And if you look at the Facebooks and the Googles and all these big companies that are pretty successful, you end up seeing very similar patterns in design, very similar interactions, because that's our expectations in users. And it used to be that it's the system, sorry, that's it's the user that is the troublemaker, the person who's dumb or is not able to use the software. But
Hmm.
really now it's shifted to the software needs to be user friendly. It needs to adapt to the changing world, changing people. It needs to be something that anybody can use, whether you're completely an expert or you're somebody who's completely new. And it needs to be guiding you as a user. And that's when I come in. I come in, I look at the users, I interview them, I look at the stakeholders and I make sure, which are the people who are investing in the software, and I make sure that their goals are aligned, but also accounted. The user is accounted, and that's my job.
Okay, okay, and it's interesting that how that shift occurred, or has occurred, and now people are really really just coming on board with this, and it kind of goes to that old adage, the customer is always right, right?
Yeah.
And it's I'm intrigued to just understand, like, when you're having conversations with companies about their user experience and their design, how what is the biggest challenge usually if you're in the field, new to it? What are going to be your biggest challenges with companies getting them to understand that shift and where we are today? Can you talk
Yeah.
about how that impacts what you do?
Sure. So, first of all, you never want to tell anybody your baby is ugly. People invest tons and tons of money into their products, but it's important to bring the user experience design to the forefront and to the initial steps, because this is where we can understand the audience and bring the product, align the product with them, while not identifying the technical limitations. So UX really sits between the business, that client, the technical aspect of things, and the user. And that shift. So you asked about how do we talk to clients about the user experience and making sure that they you know understand the value. It's difficult, it's still growing. I'll be honest, I don't have it all figured out. It's not always easy to convince somebody to invest in that, but data is what I use. So I try to leverage different user research, whether it is user interviews, analytics, anything to show and tell that story. Tell a story, hey, it's not about aesthetics, it's about usability. Your folks cannot figure out how to navigate a page, and you're going to lose people within the first 20 seconds of them applying going to the website. Not even that, it could be 7 seconds. People leave a website, leave a product if they get frustrated. They won't follow through a purchase. So making these kind of uh, ways for them to interact with your system, your software, your product easier and more intuitive is going to save you money. And so telling that story is important, but it does take, I believe, data and ways to back it up, because people don't really want to spend that kind of time and money. They rather just get it out to the market. They love their idea, but they need to make sure it's intuitive and easy to use.
Right. So, and I think that kind of leads us right into some skill sets and some things to be mindful of if you're looking to get into the field. Because, like you said, it's not about just the design, it's about data, it's about the research, it's about psychology, what is it, human centered design,
Yep.
and just how people learn best and I guess read best or understand best when it comes to an interface working on the screen as compared to holding a piece of paper and reading paragraphs compared to using a mobile device with a screen with touch points and a upper left corner and a bottom right corner, which one is best? So the skills around being a user experience designer, can you talk about some of those skill sets that may be not top of mind? Most people would think, I would think, design skills, some maybe some coding, some I guess I don't know the proper term, but like some back end uh, knowledge just to really have in order to I guess make the whole machine go. Can you talk about some of those other skills outside of the maybe obvious ones, quote unquote, that people typically relate to user experience design?
Sure. So a lot of times UX works really closely with development. So the back end and the technical is really a development phase, and UX kind of happens before the user experience. There, it starts with research. So a lot of the skills could be very much statistics. If you want to be a UX researcher, it could be analytical skills. It could be um, that cognitive psychology we talked about, understanding how users think, how are they behaving, behavioral psychology. And honestly, if you have the patience to just sit there, fly on the wall style, and observe somebody do something, that could be UX. As long as you can take that information and then tell the story. So communication is huge, which is not you don't really think about that, but being able to take what you learned, what you observed, and translate it to something meaningful to the stakeholder and have that conversation with them. Have some visual is important, but you don't have to be visual designer at all. As if you do have the visual skills, whether it's graphic design or it could be from having very high fidelity mock-ups where you do use those graphics and icons and things like that, to visual things like a journey map, which tells the story of somebody going through a journey of using certain technology or certain products. Um, so there's all kinds of visuals that you do along the way, but you don't have to have the visual skills at all if you want to be a UX researcher or there's also writing. If you have writing skills, a lot of people don't think about it, but you can have a content strategist, a content strategist, and have those skills applied. And you can think about how will you communicate to the user what they have to do quickly and easily. Uh, Last thing I'll say too is information architecture is super important for design, and it's not designing pretty things. It's designing the structure of the website. How will the information flow from top to bottom or left to right? How will somebody navigate through the website? All that, thinking through an interaction, planning around a user, and then studying and validating that interaction and that behavior is super important for user experience. And that testing is key to making sure that any assumptions you made, you have confidence to move forward and say, this is the design, this is how the user is going to use it best, and we need to make sure we implement it.
Got it.
So
So let me ask you this question as it relates to, because it's, thank you. That was a very thorough answer, right? Very thorough. And I'm trying to put myself in I I like design. I'm familiar with social media. I'm familiar with mobile devices. And let's say I'm a senior in high school, right? Let's say I'm a senior in high school. If I'm a senior in high school, I'm interested in art. I like design, like working with computers. I've taken a few computer information technology classes, computer science courses. I have some familiarity. I've done some Python, some network engineering, dibble and dabble. If I was interested in starting along this path that you're on, what would be some of those real kind of initial things to look for, whether that's a certain type of degree to pursue and or maybe some self-learning type of approaches or programs or certifications? What's out there like for, let's say, that senior who's just graduated, just learned this, maybe just watched this video for the first time and to hear about this? What would be some advice you would give to that senior graduate from high school who may be interested in pursuing this career that you're in?
Sure. So, first of all, welcome to UX. Join the community. It's still growing. There's lots of local and online right now with post pandemic or still pandemic. There's lots of virtual opportunities to learn and be involved in the UX community. In Pittsburgh alone, there is like Still City UX Ladies and IXDA, which are community based, where you can have a mentor to talk to. So there's definitely opportunities to just get involved. But as far as classes and degrees go, I went for information science. That was the degree I took for undergrad and grad, and I took classes like human factors and human centered. The degree, the field that I went to was human centered computing at Pitt. So there's a whole HCI human computer interaction programs out there across the country, and there's also certifications. Nielsen Norman Group, they're a resource that I use. They have a whole website with lots of articles, lots of ways to study UX, different principles and different standards. And they have a certification program, and there's a ton of other similar companies, organizations out there that have certifications in user experience. And then there's a ton of resources and books out there. One of the first initial books that you learn to read about is The Design of Everyday Things, and by Don Norman. And that book is actually really interesting. It really talks about some principles that are still true today about designing intuitive or looking at intuitive design. So definitely read, get engaged, talk to people, find me on LinkedIn. I'll be your mentor. Not a problem at all. Happy to. I'm very passionate, so I'm happy to share.
Wow, that was some great information. Can we repeat the name of that book again? What was that book?
The Design of Everyday Things
The
by
Design of
Don Norman.
by
Mhm.
Don Norman. Okay, so this is I know in every industry there's like their kind of career Bible. Is would you say that's kind of the you have to start with this one and then go from there?
I would say so. Yeah, I believe that's like
What
the.
for those who may not be able to get to the book, what did you get out of it, and how do you see that book helping someone with as it relates to gathering just some foundational knowledge about this field?
Sure. So Don Norman and Jacob Nielsen, they're kind of the founders of UX. They're the ones who have that NNG group website that I mentioned. And so that book particularly talks about kind of standards of user experience. For example, affordance. You want something to have an affordance. So, like a door could have a handle that is uh, vertical, and that's to indicate pull, while a horizontal is to push. And so when you look at a door and there's two handles kind of side by side that are both just coming out, do you know if you should push or pull? So things should let you know easily what you can do with them. That's affordance. So there's these principles in there, consistency. I might be mixing things up, but there are principles in general in UX that are kind of standards. Nielsen is responsible for the 10 heuristics, usability heuristics, which are there's other heuristics out there, but these first 10 are the ones that really help allow people to do a UX audit or evaluate a website or a product or a software or design to see, is it usable, does it meet those standards. And one of them is, and I know I just said it, but consistency was one of them. So making sure that you can't have a page that's a home that has complete different experience in each different section of it.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping things consistent allows somebody to learn it and then be able to find it quickly in the next page, for example. Um, there are rules out there and principles like you cannot have that are based on cognitive psychology, actually. So for
Mm-hmm.
example,
Exactly.
7 a plus and 1 is 2. That's an interesting rule out there, and there's another name for it, which right now I cannot think of it.
What was
I
that
want to say it's
again? What was it?
so I remember it's 7 plus and minus 2, and I'll explain in just a minute what it means. And I
Okay.
believe, and oh my gosh, people are going to judge me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's Miller's Law. I'm trying to think. But basically, oh my god, I'm going to have to look it up, and we're going to have to go back and write a
Nah,
comment this if
it's
I'm
okay.
wrong. But
Trust me, I'm
um,
sure they know what you mean.
so 7 a plus and minus 2, what it is if you have us, we can remember things up to 7 plus or minus 2. So 5 is a great number for you to be able to remember things. And then 9 is probably the high end. You don't really want to have more. So, for example, do you remember your social security number? Probably, because that's 9 digits.
Hmm.
But if you go to try to remember your credit card, which I've tried because I like to shop online and then I totally
Good point. Good
always have
point.
to go, I cannot remember it. 16
Good
digits is
point.
too much. That's when you
Mm,
look at a website in the menu on the top, there's usually 5 items, maybe 7, maybe 9, but no more. If you have more, people are going to not be able to navigate easily. So there's
hmm.
these kind of rules and principles out there that you can look up. If you just look up on Google UX rules, UX principles, you'll be able to
Right.
find these, and they're basics and they're great.
Wow. What's interesting enough? So I I was a sociology major in college, which sociology is kind of the big umbrella with smaller, cognitive related fields of study such as psychology. And so we learn about psychology. And interestingly enough, when you said about the consistency and the 7 plus or minus 2, I really like that. It reminded me of two things. One, presentations. When you give a PowerPoint presentation, one thing that I learned just from the research and started applying it, and it always worked, is say you have a slide. If your slide has text on the left, image on the right, you don't want to each slide switch the picture around and move it because it's causing what is titled cognitive overload, right? Which
Yes.
causes the user to, or the onlooker, but in this case, the user to have that overload of, it's like, this is too much. I'm now my mind is everywhere. Now I'm frustrated, and I guess you could say flight or fight response kicks in, and typically simple swipe up or swipe away. Usually people are gone, which as a user experience designer, I'm sure that's not what you want, right?
Not at all.
So, and then the second one is around the attention span, neuroscience, right? Where they say for attention span, it usually our attention span grows with us up to around 11 to 12 years old. So they always say, at most, don't give a presentation or even a recording like this without, there being brain breaks around 10 to 12 minutes, which a lot of people, when they're doing presentations, um, they're not aware of that. You ever been to one of those, events and someone's just talking? You're like, wow, we've been here for 30 minutes. There's been nothing. So my last point is
Yep.
visually too. You can use brain breaks. So as I'm making these transitions and these slides to here and there, what I'm doing, is really causing a mental click of, hey, reminder. Some people use bells. You'll hear people in videos that'll go ding. That's just to get back your attention because That's the number one
Yep.
thing in education, which is interestingly enough what everything you're trying to do in your field, right? You're trying to keep the attention of the user because without that,
Exactly.
where will you go? So wow, woo, boom. There's so many connecting pieces here, but to the point of, hey, you don't have to be a programmer or computer science, whatever word you want to put to it. That there's so many different paths of entry that you can go into because there's so many fields are related. Wow, what are your thoughts on that?
First of all, everything you said is 100% UX. We have, first of all, I already said, first of all, cognitive overload is something that we are worried about. We don't want to have too much information, too many distractions. We also worry about it when we think of information architecture and the content we display in a website, for example. You mentioned breaking things apart. We chunk the information. There's a lot of times show more, show less. That's on purpose. If you want, we give you the important things up front, and then if you want to click to see more, you can, because we want to grab your attention and keep your attention. We have groupings. We have things that are left aligned, right aligned, and blank spaces on purpose, and things like that, so that you can navigate through a website, for example, in a way that is makes sense to you, that is intuitive, that is easy to follow, and you can find exactly what you need. And so a lot of these principles are coming from those two names that I mentioned earlier, Nielsen and Norman, and they are principles that we apply. So if you have an education background and you want to switch careers, come to UX because you can literally apply everything you've learned in UX. Same with, as you mentioned, even people who do videos and things like that. There's so much stuff you can apply. It definitely there. People who land in UX come from so many different backgrounds. I knew a writer, somebody who did publishing, and then became a user experience designer. UX, there's so many different titles from design to, like I said, research and then writing. And then you can just really any background you have, you can come into UX as long as you have empathy. You can really relate to users and try to understand users, put yourself in their shoes. And as long as you're hungry for that research and validation, and you like things like visual design, any of those things, you can end up being in UX and you will succeed. You just have to have that kind of eye to detail and just be passionate about what you do, represent that user, and just keep going.
Yeah, and I want to just stick right there on that word you used. You said as long as you have empathy, right? Empathy, which is very interesting because uh, I follow a lot of people online, influencers, but one of the main ones is Gary Vaynerchuk. Are you familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V? No, well, he's a online social media motivational, but he's also a CEO of VaynerMedia, multiple businesses. Probably is going to eventually be one of the biggest marketing agencies in the world. So look him up at Gary
Oh,
V.
well.
Very, but one thing he always emphasizes is just being a good person, like being nice and being making sure you're focused on providing that value for the customer. And the interesting thing enough when you say empathy, as someone who's been in education my entire career, I've always said to people who get into education, a lot of times in my interviews when I'm chairing an interview committee, if I have that freedom for that company, to say, you cannot fake education. Either you really care or you don't. It's like you think about those first grade teachers, those kindergarten, those pre. You can't fake being around little kids, uh, making noises, doing all this stuff without having some empathy, some patience, some care, but also understanding, the value that you're providing. So I want to kind of pivot just slightly to um, the people that you work with, right? The business owners, the organizations, the nonprofits, the healthcare companies, all the different people. What can you tell us about what you do in the career? What's the value that you all bring um, typically when you're working with these organizations, like as a user experience designer, and I know there's other names such as product designer, things like that. What is it that you're bringing that makes what you do valuable, and how does it help businesses grow and impact more of the customers and community that they're trying to serve?
Sure. Fantastic question. So, as I mentioned before, we do sit UX designers sit in between business, user, and technology. And for the business, it's really important to understand their return of on investment, understand what they're trying to achieve. And so the first thing we do is we try to align with the stakeholders and their goals and dig deep to why they're redesigning or why they're trying to come up with this product. What are they trying to achieve? Who's the audience? And we asked a ton of questions. A lot of my job is asking questions and listening. And the stakeholders, they need to trust in me that before they invest all their dollars on development, I will be there to try to walk in the user's shoes, and understand the current states. If it's a redesign, what can be improved, what the pain points are of the user, why are users not using the product, what's going on. If it's a new product, to try and understand the market, the industry, competitor analysis. There's a lot of market research that is user research, UX research, but in a way it's market research because we're trying to understand the industry and the patterns and the standards and what's going on, who are the competitors, what are they doing better or different. Wow, I can really talk about this stuff. um, but I love it. So
Yeah.
really trying to come into the stakeholder and say, hey, we're going to learn everything we can ahead of development so that when we go to development, we're certain we're developing the right product. We're designing the right website, the right software, enterprise, whatever, especially enterprise, because these people are forced to do their work using the software. Yeah, you're not selling it, you're not trying to get lots of downloads, but people are stuck using your product. You want to make sure it's usable and user friendly so they
Right.
can make
See,
their job
and
easy.
that's something that I just never quite understood, and it's so interesting how everything you're saying just makes sense, right? And it's like, hey, you invest in this app, you invest in this website, whatever the case may be, and at the end of the day, the goal should be to get the most usability out of it. And but you may not you may not be aware, right? So that's why interviews like this are important, because now that someone watching this is aware that there's a career field that's dedicated specifically to that. Because I think when the tech boom was going, it was like, oh, build the website. It's like, oh, great, you have a website, we got it. But is the website user friendly, right? Is it usable? Right, at the end of the day, like you said, if there's blocks in left alignment, right alignment, columns, and there's 34 links on there, that may cause that overload, that cognitive overload we spoke about.
Yep.
So if you were an owner of a business, let's make it a little personal, Alina.
Sure.
What would be your kind of approach to reaching out to a user experience designer? How would you, if you, and imagine, put yourself just kind of, I'm starting out my business. Yes, you could do it, but let's just say you wanted to do some outreach to a user experience. What is it that someone should look for in a user experience designer if they were trying to work with one to help their business grow and be more
Sure.
successful?
So I understand it's scary. Investing money in anything, especially if it's small business, is not always easy. But UX doesn't have to necessarily be a whole process with a user researcher and then a designer and then a whole content strategist. It doesn't have to be terribly expensive. You could find a freelance designer or someone who's in school who's trying to get a portfolio. So first of all, always ask for portfolio. It is something that is a requirement in this field, and if you don't have one, don't be scared. Or if you're not a visual person, if you're trying to get a job, don't be alarmed because it's all about the process. When I create my portfolio, I actually recently had to update it. I look at what am I trying to tell about the process of going from one end to the other, and did the user experience improve in between. And so, for example, I worked on a for a nonprofit, so the budget was very low. I worked on a app that is for domestic violence protection. It's a resource app. And I didn't have access or budget to talk to everybody, especially not victims, because you can't access victims, privacy and such. But I needed to understand the navigation. So I did what's called a tree test, and I did it with my coworkers because it's all about find wayfinding. And so I had coworkers go through a tree test in PowerPoint. I made a clickable PowerPoint. And so, I didn't use any resources on just my time, really, as far as budget goes. And so, but I was able to find a good navigation and validate that it works through that tree test because people were able to find the items I asked them to look for. And it was a two iterative 2 iterations of tree testing. And so point is, you don't have to have a huge budget. You don't have to have um, necessarily the best expert out there. Anyone who is identifies as UX designer or such similar title, product designer or intern, or wants to learn it, wants to do it, who is has the background in the kind of the principles and the standards, who wants to maybe build a portfolio and apply the UX process in to a product or website, let's say for this individual, finding that person, partnering up with them, giving them the kind of permission and trust, the autonomy to, hey, you go, you talk to my clients, you talk to my, you interview people, because it's really time. It's not necessarily resources. But from a, if you want to do it yourself as that business owner, which
Mm-hmm.
I do recommend giving a chance to someone like me, someone out there who's interested. I wasn't always a professional in the field. I did have to start out somewhere. So there's lots of people out there who are
Exactly.
interested in getting in. Find
Exactly.
someone who's looking to get an internship, even if it's unpaid, or maybe there's a way to compensate. But let them have the time. I think it's more important time than anything. A lot of times when I get a client that needs something by tomorrow, and they don't give me the time to validate my research or designs after I've already come up with a prototype, for example. A lot of times I want to be able to usability test it. That's when I think it can get lost a little bit, and you don't get your value. It's about give, planning out that time to and investigate invest sorry the time for that investigation, for someone to
Yeah.
go in there and talk to your users, do the user research, then do
Mm-hmm.
the prototyping or designing, even if it's black and white, low fidelity prototype, wireframe, anything, just to kind of get some visuals. And it's all about thinking and ideating and coming up with ideas and iterating, and really getting to a place where you feel confident that this is the way to go, this is a solution. And then development going to be at the higher cost, but having that UX done up front will at least assure you that this cost is going somewhere, and you're confident, and you know that this is going to be user friendly, usable. A lot of people like to use MVP. I didn't coin this term, but I love MLP, minimally lovable product. If your users love it,
Mm.
you don't have to have all the
I
bells and
like that.
whistles.
I
You
like
can
that.
just make it favorable and user friendly, and that's all you need to do. So for that person, and just to conclude, is that give the time to someone who's interested in the field. Doesn't have to be a huge transaction, doesn't have to be expensive, but allow them to use your product in their portfolio to show the process, and give them the time to apply the process. And the UX process, you can Google it, it's out there. It's very specific, but it is iterative, and it allows you to feel confident in that final solution.
Wow. Wow. What a amazing insight from an entrepreneurial perspective that I think many business owners who may run across this video can get a lot of value out of, because I would think, I mean, I not I'm familiar with the field, but not as deeply ingratiated as you are. Um, but just making sure people have like a portfolio, like you said, maybe a student who's in a similar career path, giving them an internship possibility, things like that. I think that's very valuable. Wow. So uh, I don't have anything more to say about, just that's some very valuable insight, looking at it from an owner perspective. So we're wrapping up here, and I just want to kind of give you one last open ended question to really kind of give your your push, being an advocate for this career field, for anyone that may be interested in pursuing the field or working with someone in the field. Why is the field of user experience designer? Why should someone join it? Why should people work with user experience designers? So this is your time to give the hoorah for the user experience designer field. What do you have to say for the field that you're in?
Okay, so this field is still growing, and it needs a little bit of love. It needs love from the those stakeholders who may want a product sooner than later and may want to cut some corners, but giving that time to allow for that research will really help. I do want to encourage more people to join the field who may represent those that are not being represented. So we're talking about diversity, inclusion, and also accessibility, especially having a lot of times when we interview people that are available to us, you know, it still represents a very small population. And then a lot of clients may be okay with it, but really we should be continuously looking to be more inclusive and out there. So many people are dependent on so much software and products out there, and we do have some standards in place. There's a term called user mental models. So we have all these mental models of how the world should be, how it should work, and so we just need to have more representation of these people and these thoughts, and have more people designing for for our population and really improving their lives through user experience design.
Wow, great, great. Thank you so much, Alina. This has been an amazing interview. I'm sure many people will find it very valuable. If you like this interview, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and we thank you all for joining us for this edition of the follow up. See you on the next one. Take care.